Good morning and namaste to all of you. Let's start our Sunday Gita class with some mantras. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritvarshine Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayani Am Tvam Anusandhami Bhagavad Gita Bhagavadveshini नमो अस्तु ते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमय प्रदीपः परपान्न पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पानये ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदन पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगद्गुरु भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्रावती कृपेन वहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण गोरमकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सो तीर्ना खलु पांडवै रन नदी कैवर्त का केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलं गीता अर्थगंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपद रह रह पे पिये मानव मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिं यत्कृपातमः वन्दे परमानंद माधवम् यम ब्रह्म वरुणींद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदे सांग कर्मोपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्थे तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are towards the end of our 5th chapter in Bhagavad Gita, Karam Sanyas Yoga. Let's look at verse number 25. That's where we ended our last week's class. Labhante Brahm Nirvanam Rishyaha Kashin Kalmashaha Chin Dvedha Yat Atmanaha Sarvabhute Hiterata. So those rishis obtain absolute freedom. Which rishis? Whose sins have been destroyed, whose dualities are torn asunder, who are self-controlled. So these are called rishis. But what do they do after doing that? After reaching to that state? They intend on the welfare of all beings. So they live their life for others. And that was the motto of our Guruji also. Live for others. In fact, his last words from his mouth before he left this mortal body, live for others. Sarvabhut hite vata. We can live for others only if we have control over our own senses. Because normally we want to just please our own senses. Day and night, we just keep on thinking about how we can pamper ourselves, how we can feed ourselves, how we can bring more and more pleasure to ourselves. But when we forget ourselves, only then we can serve others. That's what service is. Sarva bhuta hite rata. Welfare of all beings. Common Hindi word for this is lok seva. That becomes a recreation. Rata. Rata means rejoicing. They do it happily. Just like we do it happily, selfish actions for ourselves, they do the lok seva happily. Through their body, through their mind, through their intellect, they offer it as oblations into the sacred fires of activity. And at themselves, they stay resting in themselves. That's what they do. Remaining at rest within himself, the saint lives on in an unbroken consciousness of the divine, the eternal, never forgetting the eternal. So body is helping somebody, senses are helping somebody, other material possessions are for the help of other people, but he himself remains attached to God. Okay. Let's start the class with verse number 26. काम क्रोध व्युक्ता नाम यति नाम यत चेत साम अभिता ब्रह्म निर्वाणम वर्तते विदित आत्म नाम. काम is desire, क्रोध is anger, vyukta naam, free. So of those who are free from desires and anger, yati naam is the self-controlled ascetic or a saintly person. Yat chet sam, those who have controlled their thoughts, chetnas also. Abhita, on all sides. Brahm nirvanam, absolute freedom. Vartate, exists. Vidit atmanam, of those who have realized the self. Lord Krishna says, absolute freedom. Brahm nirvan exists on all sides for those self-controlled ascetics who are free from desire and anger, who have controlled their thoughts, and who have realized the self. So by the work of serving the mankind, master is not, the saintly person is not losing anything actually. Even in this world, here and now, rejoicing the highest. But he knows how to protect himself also. And this is the way to protect yourself. Staying free from desire and anger, controlling your senses, controlling your thoughts. This is what we need to do. It's almost like a doctor is working with the unhealthy people. We know only the sick people go to the doctors. How do they protect themselves? How come they don't catch every disease which the patients are coming with? They know how to protect themselves. So the same way the saintly person, the ascetic, knows how to protect himself. Have a full control over the desires. Otherwise, desires are the one, they are the gateways to this world. I want this, I want to have it, I want to go there. I haven't finished this. Desires. They are free from all the desires. And if there's no desire, there won't be any anger. Anger is directly related with the desires. Look at the person who gets angry very easily. Will have a lot of desires. Reduce your desires, anger will be reduced. Control your senses, control your thoughts. So this is how this person is working and protecting himself while serving others. It's almost like he knows how to build this immunity, how to maintain this immunity and how to preserve this immunity with that equanimity in the mind. Otherwise, the temptations of the vicious atmosphere are plenty. But he knows. So when a sincere seeker, through his own intelligent self-effort and divine self-application, He has conquered the instincts of the lust and the anger in him. That's how he has known the self. It's not that you know the self by going somewhere. Self is right here, but we need to learn how to control this outer, external environment. So that's why constantly Lord Krishna is telling us, purify your mind. Purify your mind. Calm your mind. And this is all here for you. And he has been telling Arjuna that Karam Yoga is the safer path to take. He is very strongly recommending to Arjuna that keep doing your duties, but make sure that you do your duties as a yogi. Slowly you will reach the Karam Sanyas also. So these are the steps on the ladder. Karam Yoga, Gyan Karam Sanyas Yoga, and Karam Sanyas Yoga. Now let's look at the next two verses together. Sparshan kritvaha bahi bahyan chakshucha ev antre bravo pranapanau samo kritva nasa bhi antra charino. Sparshan, contact. Kritva, keeping. Bahi, outside. Bahyan, external. Chakshu, eyes. Cha means and, ev means even, antre, in the middle, like between, bravo, of the eyebrows. Pran apanau, outgoing and the ingoing breath. Pran apan. Samau, equal. Kritva, keeping. Nasa bhi antra, charino. Charino means moving. Nasa bhi is the nostrils. Antar means inside. Moving inside the nostrils. I think there's a question on the previous verse. Let me look at that before we move on to this one, because this is a little different thought now. What does it mean liberated here and thereafter? Here means right here in this body. Okay, it's like a Sanskrit term for that is Jivan Mukta. You are living, but you are free. Hereafter is after you leave this body. So whether you are here in this body or whether you leave this body, you are liberated. Okay, so but he is telling us the stages. Go through this, you will feel liberated. Even now, don't we feel liberated from some lower urges? That's a liberation. But he's talking about liberation in a different sense, in the spiritual sense. Okay. These two verses, 27 and 28, it's like a starting of the next chapter. See, this is a traditional style in Sanskrit textbooks on Brahm Vidya. When each section is closed, right at that point, the following section starts. It's like an introduction of the next section is right here. Okay, so shutting out all external contacts and fixing the gaze between the eyebrows, equalizing the outgoing and incoming breath, moving within the nostrils. And let me tell you, next chapter is about meditation. So that's why he is giving us a technique of meditation here. That's what he's just in a summary form telling us. This is like a last couple of verses are connectors between these two chapters. Yat indriye manobuddhi muni moksha prayana vigat ichha bhay krodha ya sada mukta eva sa. Yat indriye manobuddhi. with the senses, mind, and intellect ever controlled. Okay, so yat means controlled. Indriya senses, man, mind, buddhi, intellect. Muni, the sage, moksha parayana, having liberation as his supreme goal. Whenever we do something, there is some kind of a goal in our mind. So for a yoga abhyasi, for a muni, for a rishi, the goal is liberation always. Vigat ichha bhay krodha. Vigat means free. Ichha is the desire, bhay is the fear, krodh is the anger. Okay, ichha bhay krodh. Free from these three lower urges. Ya means who, sada means always, forever. Muktaha, free. Ev means verily, sa means he. With the senses, mind, and intellect ever controlled. Having liberation as his supreme goal. Free from desire, fear, and anger. The sage is very liberated forever. Over here, forever means forever. Now also, afterwards also. So again, in these two verses, Lord Krishna is hinting the summary of the entire following chapter. And we'll see that in detail how he's going to tell us how to meditate. He's giving us a complete picture of the man of perfection and his purpose in this life at all levels of his existence. All levels. That's why he said, Indriya man buddhi. What to do with those instruments? This tells us that yogis are not dreamers. They are helping the society. They want to live a very purposeful life, efficient life, effective life in this world. They want to help others, but at the same time, they do not forget their own goal also. They don't lose themselves while helping others. And they are not just enamored of mere ideas. Ideas could be very noble. Unless those ideas can actually be lived in life, those are just a figment of our imagination. Very practical people, yogis are. So that's why over here, Lord Krishna is giving us a summary or a scheme of practice. Practice. So external world of objects, we all know, it has been said many times, cannot by itself bring any disturbance to any one of us. It is only when we establish a contact with the external world of objects, we feel the agitations or the disturbances in our mind. It's almost like if we are standing on the bank of a river, looking at the river, we will never get wet. That's how a yogi lives. Okay. So forms, sounds, tastes, smells, touches, we live with these senses. But we ordinary people get disturbed by these because we just let the external world flow into our internal world. But the yogi learns to keep that external in the external and internal is just feels that bliss of God internally. He does not get agitated by any of the external things because he doesn't identify with them. Identification is with the God. So there is an intimate relationship between the rhythm of the flow of breath in us and our own mental thought condition. So that's why he has mentioned over here Pran Apan. We all know that more agitated the mind is, more uncertain becomes the rhythm of our breathing. So Lord Krishna is instructing us, advising us to control our breath, the breath flow. Inhalation, exhalation. We are doing it all the time, but do it as a yogi. It becomes a very conducive physical practice to quieten our mind. That's why it's before meditation, it's a very good idea to just focus on your breath, equalize it. So physically we are adjusting it, but it creates a very conducive mental atmosphere, because physical and the pran and the mind, they are all connected. And then we are asked to control our sense appetites, mental oscillations, or even the intellectual storms, by dedicating all to God. And as far as a taming of the intellect, again and again he is telling us to renounce desires, fear, and anger. Keep these three things in mind. This is a very beautiful theory of self-development and inner growth. There's an intimate relationship between these three: desire, fear, and anger. What is a desire? Let's revisit it. We've been talking about it quite a bit, but in summary, I would say desire is that pattern of thought in which the mind runs constantly towards a given object, with an anxious expectation of either procuring it or possessing it. So if you already have it, you want to keep it. If you don't have it, you want it. That's a desire. Where there's a desire, there will be a fear. If I don't get it, if somebody else gets it, that's a fear. And this fear is the one which creates that maddening anger which we see in our mind. Anger. Okay. So when these three emotions, desire, fear, and anger, are controlled, actually we have controlled almost all the mad impulses of our intellect. And he who has freed himself from desire, fear, and anger, who has controlled his senses, mind, and intellect, and he has a very consuming ambition for liberation. That means just constantly watching for that liberation, and has quietened the flow of the breath. This is this kind of an individual can remain in the contemplation of truth. External objects are there, but external objects will not affect the mind. And he says, during meditation at least, keep your gaze right here, in the middle of the eyebrows. Such a person of meditation is free. Free. No disturbance. So that freedom will come later on. Even though Lord Krishna says that the person is free, it's almost like when we are putting a kettle of water on the stove. What do we say? I'm making tea. It's not a tea yet. We are only boiling the water, but we are saying, I'm making tea. The same way Lord Krishna is saying, this person is free. That means he's on the path. Just like we are on the process of making tea when we put water in the kettle or in the pan. So this person has started the process and ultimately will be free. That's what he means. It's not just a one time you sit down, keeping your gaze in the middle of the eyebrows, and you think that you are perfectly calm. You are liberated now. You just started. Keep that in mind. Because often we read these kind of statements and we just take it literally. We forget that what was said before, that you have to do the sadhana. Okay? There's one more verse left of this chapter. Bhogtaram yagye tapsam sarvalok maheshwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shantim richati. Bhogtaram, the enjoyer. Yagye tapsam, of the sacrifices and austerities. Okay, in the previous chapter, we talked about yagya quite a bit. Lord Krishna mentioned several kinds of yagyas. And sacrifice means doing the action, giving the fruits to others. That's a yagya. Okay. Tapasam, austerities. Sarvalok Maheshwaram, of great Lord of all worlds. Suhridam, selfless. Suhrid, or a friend. Friend is always a selfless friend. Sometimes we don't even understand what this friend word is. Friend is where there's a selflessness. Suhrid. Sarvabhutanam, of all beings. Gyatva, realized, known. Mam, me, shantim, peace. Richati, attains. He's saying that knowing me as enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities, the great Lord of all worlds, the friend of all beings, he attains peace. So when we are walking on this path, these are the qualities. So he attains peace on knowing me. Never forget that in Bhagavad Gita, when Lord Krishna uses this first person singular, he does not mean that his mortal framework, which was created by his parents, Devaki, okay, and Vasudeva. He is indicating the self in the individual, the eternal principle, Paramatma, Brahma, God, okay, not a physical body of Krishna. Keep that in mind. And Yagya word, self-dedicated work in any field of activity. When we offer it to God, give the fruits of our action to others, that's a Yagya. So that's why I said self-dedicated work. It could be anything. You can go back to the previous chapter and find out how many different ways you can do the Yagya. All day long. Yogi's life is a Yagya Rupi. Every action is a Yagya. And tap means all self-denial and practices of self-control. That's a tapa. When we have a good control over our ego, and we have a very well integrated personality, that is a tapasvi's personality. And this self, the soul, is certainly the Maheshwar, the Lord of all the Lords, Maha-Ishwar. So over here, Ishwar is to be understood as the controller of all fields of activities. That means activities of the perception, expression, And there is a presiding deity for every sense, which is called a Deva. Okay, so he's using all these words over here for us. And then at the end, the knowing, Gyatva. This knowing is not objectively knowing, in the sense we know something outside of us, some fruit or some object. So the term knowing should be understood as a realizing. So spiritual experience is the realization of the self. And what is that self? Self is the great ruler within. The Ishta, or the self, or the God of this body also. The Atma, who presides over all the activities within the body. Okay, so this is what he's talking about. He says, knowing me as the enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities, the great Lord of all worlds, the friend of all beings, he attains peace. He is a friend of all. He is a Suhrid. This is a philosophy where we are not supposed to be even afraid of God. We are never afraid of our friend. So he is our friend. We got to just do what we are supposed to do and attain this peace. He says, Shantim Richati, because we got to attain this peace, peaceful life. And he's telling us how to do it. And we'll see that in next chapter, which is the title of next chapter is Atam Sanyam Yoga. Atam Sanyam Yoga. Try to memorize the titles of the chapters also. Our journey started out with Vishad Yoga, the first chapter. Remember that? That's Sankhya Yoga, the second chapter. Karam Yoga. Then Gyan Karam Sanyas Yoga. And then this one is, fifth one is Karam Sanyas Yoga. So this week, try to memorize these first 5 titles of these chapters. So very beautifully, he is telling us that sadhana, which we need to do. He has explained it actually throughout, but in the last 2 verses, he says, this sadhana can lead you to Atam Gyan, knowledge of the self, Atam Gyan. But the Brahma Gyan, see, there's a Atam Gyan, there's a Brahma Gyan. Sadhana can take you all the way to the Atam Gyan. But Brahma Gyan requires something different. That is the grace of God. Grace of God. And how do we get the grace? Through devotion, through bhakti. And he'll talk about that also in the next 6 chapters beautifully. So there's a Karam Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Gyan Yoga, all of that. So we should not forget what we have learned in order to learn further. Keep on practicing what he has been telling us to practice. And intensify your practice as you move further. So let's stop it here. I would request Urmil to finish this chapter also from her book. I think there are few verses left. And then after that, many will sing the bhajan. Om Purnamada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, before Urmil you start, I think there was a question. Let me look at if I can answer that question also. Karam Sanyas, Gyan Karam Sanyas and Karam Sanyas. Okay. You have written Karam Sanyas 2 times over here. Karam Sanyas, Gyan Karam Sanyas, Karam Sanyas. Actually, it goes like Karam Yoga, Gyan Karam Sanyas, and Karam Sanyas. I think this question is asked by Padma, right, Padma? Okay. So first step on the ladder is Karam Yoga. Karam Yoga has some conditions. Doing your duty lovingly, selflessly, skillfully. That's a Karam Yoga. Selflessly, that means you are not doing it for yourself. Okay, selflessly. Then next ladder comes when you are offering it to God. That's a Gyan Karam Sanyas. What is a Gyan? Gyan means God is everywhere. All my actions as a Karam Yogi, I am offering it to God. Okay, so that's the next step on that ladder of evolving. After that comes Karam Sanyas. Because you are identifying now with the real you, which is the Atma, which doesn't do anything. So you are still doing what you are supposed to do. You are offering it to God, and you have that notion that I'm not even doing it. That's how we climb this ladder of evolution. Okay, I hope that's clear. But if you have a question, ask.